All right, you're still watching TVC Breakfast. It's now time to take you to the Center of Unity, where we have Tijesu Adeoye and Eshomamo Ibodu with the FCT brief. Happy New Month, my people. In Akwana, the conversation is now with you.
Thank you, Ria. Happy New Month to you as well. And a beautiful week. It's great to be back here on the table to give you the brief, as always, so stay tuned.
Yeah, good morning, Nigerians. Nice to have you here on this first day of June. TJ, let's give them what we have.
All right, let's go into what we have today. Nigeria's political landscape continues to evolve under the leadership of President Bola Tinubu, whose administration, few days ago, marked 3 years in office. From economic reforms and infrastructure development to security interventions and governance initiative, the Tinubu presidency has remained at the center of national discourse, attracting both commendation and criticisms from different segments of the society.
As the administration reaches this significant milestone, questions persist about the impact of its policies on the lives of ordinary Nigerians, the state of the economy, and the broader direction of the nation. Has the government delivered on its promises? What achievements stand out and what challenges remain unresolved as the administration enters its next phase? Examining the scorecard of the president's first 3 years and the implications for Nigeria's political and economic future is Charles Chukwuebuka Onwuche Esquire, who is also a political affairs analyst whose perspectives on governance, public policy, and national development continue to shape conversations on contemporary political issues. Nice to have you here this morning.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, 3 years of President Tinubu's administration, oftentimes the government points to improvement in a lot of macroeconomics, infrastructure development, and several increase in revenue and all that. But to some Nigerians, the question is, why has this macroeconomic gains not translated into putting more food on our table and all that? So how would you explain to those people that the variation between the macroeconomic gains and the micro gains?
Sure. You know, every economy, when any reform is put together, there's always going to be a pinch. There's always going to be an opportunity of saying, hey, these are our goals. But there's always an analysis of where we are today. I think in Nigeria faces the same challenges every other country faces when it comes to reforms. But the great thing about it, we've seen some changes happening in the last 3 years. A part of those changes is, one, we've seen our currency be more stabilized. Two, we've actually seen the cost of goods continue to come down. And then three, we've actually seen the livelihood of Nigerians changing. As a person who's living in diaspora, who spent a lot of time here in Nigeria, in America, we're actually surprised of how quickly the Nigerian economy has changed over the last couple of years.
Well, you just mentioned that you live in diaspora and, you know, sometimes in Nigeria. And the way will I say people that reside here in Nigeria measure the performance of government is how they feel. Now, let's take a look at even the insecurity that the country faces at the moment. Even it looks quite glamorous when government actually put out these macroeconomic figures. But one thing that Nigerians are shouting is safety. No one can sleep with their eyes closed. No one is safe. And, you know, there are children right now in the bushes. How do you not expect the citizens, Nigerians, I'm particular about that, to, you know, rate government, especially with this challenging issue of security?
Sure. I think Nigerians, folks who are living here, obviously, and the folks abroad should always hold our government accountable. And I think Nigerians are doing that very well. But I think the one thing we have to recognize, especially when it comes to security, security is not an issue that happened last 2 years, 5 years, 30 years. Security is an ongoing issue. So we really commend the government for putting resources towards security. One suggestion that I think we hear quite a bit is that we have folks who are leading the charge when it comes to security across the states, but they're from other parts of the country. And we know insecurity is a local issue, right? So if we want to address the idea of security, it's not just resources, but getting people to understand those communities, those villages, those places, and making sure the leaders in those communities, when it comes to our police, our fire, our paramedics, those who are from the community, know the language, they know the people, they know the culture, they would interact with communities. And the last part that I would say is security is not just a government issue. Security is a people's issue. And I want to encourage more Nigerians for working with our police officers, working with their local commanders and commissioners, saying, hey, I'm seeing this issue and I'm reporting it. For me, my experience being in America, one thing I love to do is being an advocate for my community and also taking a stewardship role, right? So if I see a car breaking in, I'm going to report it. If I see someone's house getting broken into, I'm going to report it. If I see something in the community that doesn't look right, I'm going to report it. And I think we need to improve our relationship when it comes to our police officers and our community, know that we work together in tandem to addressing this. In addition, of course, we're going to rely on the federal government to continue to support us financially, making sure we have trainings, officers, and manpower to do that. We're also going to make sure that citizens take an active role in that process.
Okay. Earlier you talked about the variation between when you have those macroeconomic gains and all that. But the challenge is, I think even last just over the weekend, we had the Nigerian Governors Forum advocating for an increase in the minimum wage to 100,000. But if you look at the percentage of the workforce, of the labor force, it's like 5% of the population of Nigeria. So even if you increase their wages to 100,000, so a lot of people, it can't still take them home.
Agreed.
So now the question is, what can government put in place that beyond what you say, the 100,000 for a minimum wage, so that the larger population can also have more liquidity? Because if they have more liquidity, they can spend more. The economy also can be regenerated if they have the liquidity. So
Sure. So I think two things. As a economist by trade, one of the factors we use to judge an economy is called the Gini coefficient. Essentially, it's a line that says the closer you are to 1, the more ability of purchasing power a country can have with their dollar, or in this case, the naira. And I think here in Nigeria, the one thing we focus a lot, and I hear a lot of conversations that, hey, we want to make sure that we get a minimum wage for Nigerians, moving from 70 to maybe 100 or 180,000. And I think that's 10% of the issue. The other 90%, something that you're hinting on, is the purchasing power of the naira. If I make $100,000 or $200,000 a month, what can I buy with that $200,000? Fuel. You think about how much it costs to fuel a vehicle, food, whether it's rice, whether it's tomatoes, whether it's onions, and then daily needs, whether it's daily essentials, utility bills, so forth and so on. So I think what we need to focus on is saying what are the factors that take our $100,000 purchasing power and diminish it, right? Or what are the factors that can promote it? And I think that's something that the current administration is doing. And I think that's one thing that us as citizens should focus on. It's very important to understand how much we're making, but more importantly is how much we're making, what we can use those dollars, in this case, the naira for. And I think the two policies we really should be concerned about is, one, the price of goods, and then also motivating and creating infrastructure for businesses to play a bigger role in this. And one idea that I think a lot of people are really excited about is venture capital. How do we promote businesses to get involved into the government space, one? Two, how do we ensure that businesses have capital to say, hey, we're going to bring in revenue, we're going to generate revenue through sales of goods or services, and we're going to employ people at rates. And then the last thing is, how do we keep the cost of goods as low as possible, right? What are those things? So I give the proverbial example. Today, let's say interest rates jump up at 12 o'clock. If I go to the market at 11 o'clock and buy a basket of tomatoes for 6,000 naira, 1 hour later is now 8,000. And I'm saying, hey, you didn't go to the trading market and buy new tomatoes. It's just you overheard the price of interest rate changing, and then all of a sudden your price has changed in 1 hour. So I think those are the kind of the small micro factors we have to focus on. And we all know there's not one primary factor that changes the dollar conversion to naira, and there's not one factor that changes the naira's purchasing power. So we have to recognize that. So it's a conglomerate of issues and factors.
How you rate government's connectivity to the people? Because people often accuse government of being kind of disconnected with how they feel. They feel that, government reasons one thing and what they feel is different.
Sure.
How do you rate that connectivity right now?
Sure. I think government can always play a better role in connecting itself to the people. But I think we have to think about what are the avenues government already has, and then what are new avenues the government can create. So we think about people are not just Nigerian totality. People are the 36 states, the amount of local governments, the villages. So we have to understand that the means of connecting and contacting people here in Abuja and Lagos will not be the same as connecting and contacting people in the rural communities. So I think, one, setting up communication structures and what that looks like, whether it's an individual, whether it's a town hall, whether it's any type of communication we think will be relevant to that area. But the first step in that will be an assessment. So I wouldn't be able to speak on every single community and what the best way. But one thing I would encourage is what are the assessments that we can do to make sure that the great things that are happening within a government are getting to the people. And in reverse, people have a method of giving feedback to the government and saying, hey, I see this going on in my community. I recognize this can be a change, and I want the government to play a role in that. So I think the government has a responsibility to that. And we see that happening currently.
Okay, you also talked about said that it's not just about the increase in the wages, it's the purchasing power, and government has a responsibility to work on those things that takes the that reduces the purchasing power of the individual. Now, is there out of place for government to improve on subsidy? Because in this part of the world, it's like subsidy. It's a wrong thing to be done. If you put transportation vehicles on the road, you're subsidizing cost of transportation for the people. Can government work on these areas so that, okay, if the minimum wage is even 100 and the purchasing power of that is low, then you improve providing subsidy for the people so that you can cushion the effect?
Sure. I think we have to do an analysis of the benefits of subsidies and how that plays a short-term and a long-term role. You know, what I'm very thankful of this current administration led by our president, Bola Ahmed Tinubu, they said, hey, we're going to make the hard decision and remove subsidies. And interesting enough, we have a great presidential...
Subsidy for fuel.
Correct. And we have a great presidential campaign going on for aspirants. And every single person said the same thing. If I were president, I will remove fuel subsidies. So we recognize this is something that should have happened not 2 years ago, not 3 years ago, but 30 years ago. So we're very thankful for that. But we recognize that's going to have an impact to our society. And one of those impacts we see right now is the cost of goods going up. And I think if we look at just the short time that subsidy has been removed to what the impact Nigeria, we can create a direct correlation to that. And I think what you mentioned earlier, the purchasing power, you know, I can't emphasize that enough. I think the focus there is recognizing how do we take our Naira and how do we take that Naira to buy goods? And how do we keep the cost of goods low so our purchasing power for everyday Nigerians can purchase as much as they can in that instance?
All right, healthcare is quite critical, is quite a critical sector. And while government has introduced quite some subsidy and reforms, you know, we still see some of these measures still not, you know, yielding as much result as it should be. Sure. How would you advise government to intervene in that regard to ensure that these subsidies and reforms are quite effective and accessible to people that need it?
Sure. You know, I think one thing that I've seen in the last couple of months is that government is taking a very direct approach and saying, hey, we're going to do assessments state by state. We're going to recognize when it comes to healthcare, what are the needs? You know, we think about Africa, we think about Nigeria as a whole. We have a huge swath of our population under the age of 25. So their healthcare needs are going to be a little bit different. Then the reverse is very true. The healthcare needs of a gentleman will be different from the healthcare needs of a woman. So I think creating these groups and these places that people can say, hey, these are the concerns of our population. These are the concerns that are based on gender, based on race, based on ethnicity, and particularly based on age. We're going to make sure we have that. And I think the last thing is that for people to give government their feedback. You know, I don't ever want to say that government has all the right answers to dealing with concerns or issues, but I think it's very important that we make sure we create pathways for folks to give their feedback to the government, particularly when it comes to healthcare.
All right, we'll also come back to this discussion, but that will be right after this short break. Don't go anywhere. You can sip your coffee. We'll be right back. For staying with us. Now we're still reviewing the performance so far of the President Tinubu administration, and still with us in our studio is Chukwuebuka Uche.
Yeah, let's look at this other aspect. A lot of time we talk, one of the biggest legacy project of this government is the Lagos-Calabar Coastal Road, and massive investments on that corridor. But to some Nigerians, it's like, why do we need this project now? But I'd like you to help benchmark this kind of a high-level project with international practice. What kind of benefits can the economy derive from having this kind of high-tech road stretch?
It's interesting. The first time I actually heard about this was actually through the Nigerians Living in Diaspora Commission. And I want to thank the current chairman, CEO, Honorable Abike Dabira, for the work that she's doing in promoting all the great things happening in Nigeria to folks who are living abroad. And I think for a lot of us who kind of go back and forth between here, Nigeria, and abroad, whatever the respective countries may be, we recognize that coastal road is going to have a huge impact for two particular reasons, amongst them all. One is actually going to connect certain countries to the economic hub of Nigeria, Lagos. And it's going to get ease of travel from getting goods that are being manufactured here in Nigeria abroad. We recognize in the last 2 years, Nigeria has gone from their exports to increasing and their imports for decreasing. And that's a true functionality for our current government investing in manufacturing and investing in producing products here in Nigeria and selling it abroad. So I think beyond that, the second economic opportunity is that local communities are now going to benefit. And local communities have always suffered because their radius and the expansion of their goods have been, 15, 20 kilometers from their actual creation. Now you expand it to 15, 20 different countries that can benefit. So we're going to see the financial increase here in Nigeria. the strengthening of the Naira, and we're going to see the opportunity for businesses to grow and get their products not only in their particular region, but across Nigeria and overseas.
Well, President Tinubu has embarked on an aggressive marketing to attract foreign investment to Nigeria. Now, as a diasporan, will you say that there's a sufficient enabling environment for foreign investment in Nigeria? Is it looking good from outside?
Absolutely. I think there's no time like the present. Many Nigerians who live abroad and people who are not Nigerians see Nigeria as a great opportunity for foreign investment. Whether it's buying a house, whether it's bringing a business here, whether it's creating a second or third office here in Nigeria, they see that. When we look at Nigeria across all of our African countries, highest GDP, per capita for residents, and also more importantly, we see that the future is very bright. And you can't walk across Abuja, Lagos, Port Harcourt, and not see the people. And I think it's a very telltale time when we see people investing their business, but we see them bringing their families and relocating to Nigeria. And that is something that you don't necessarily see. You see, yes, I see it in Lagos, but now you're seeing in Lagos, Kano, Abuja, Port Harcourt, and now in certain regional places, Enugu, you see it in Anambra, and I think those are great telltale signs. Now, of course, this government is doing the best they can, and we really appreciate that. But we say that the infrastructure is being developed now. We're going to see the utility and obviously the appreciation next 2, 3, 5, 10 years moving forward.
Okay. Diaspora repatriation of funds to Nigeria has actually improved in our GDP rating. But what else can government put in place so that, because a lot of time we complain about the Japa syndrome and all that. But some other countries like India and some other countries, they have a system whereby those nationals that are outside have a way of bringing back their fund. So what policies can government put in place so that Nigerians that are outside can confidently repatriate their fund back into the system because they know that the system is safe for them to bring their money. So what are those things that can be put in place by government?
Sure. I think 3 things stand out to me. Number 1 is our financial system, right? We need to make it as easy as possible for folks to create accounts here in Nigeria, be able to access funds and bring funds into their country. And we think about a micro level for individuals and think on a macro level for our banking institutions. The second piece of that is the ability for folks to get in and out the country. I'm very excited and very happy for the work I've seen at the Customs and Immigration. The ease of getting a visa for folks, the ease of getting a passport, ease of coming back and forth allows people to come back to Nigeria. And I think the last thing we have to think about is people are always looking for an opportunity to feel safe. And I think what we do very well in most countries is tell what are the bad things that are happening. And I think what Nigeria needs to continue to focus on, and they're doing a good job of, is in continuing to tell the great story of all the things that are happening in Nigeria so people can continuously feel comfortable like myself in traveling back and reinvesting their hard-earned dollars into the country they love and they call home, just like I do.
Well, we are officially, would I say, in campaign season, election season. And, the accusation has come that now government is distracted from governance and more into politics. Now, how would you say government can create a balance with executing governance and still doing its politics?
Sure. I think this is a challenge every administration faces. When a new administration comes in, the first 2-3 years are focused on actually managing their government that they've been tasked to do. And then in the last 12 months, they have to naturally pivot to that address and saying, hey, I have to run for re-election. I have to make sure that I tell all the great stories I've been able to accomplish the last couple of years to the public and giving them another opportunity to move forward. So I think no other administration has it easy, and I think our current administration addresses that. I'm very thankful that our current administration has leveraged the relationships they've developed in every state, every local government to kind of speak volumes of the work they're doing so we continue managing our federal governments. And I think that management cannot change. I think of Nigerians have an expectation that you can walk and chew gum at the same time. Continue to lead our country, continue to put forth policies, but secondarily, continue to tell your image and tell your story of what you've achieved in the last couple of years.
I'd like us to take a look at the subnationals in Nigeria, talking about the states and the local governments. We are a federation, and in the federation it ought to be the federal government, the state government, the local government. But we have a system where the subnationals cannot tie themselves to the apron of the federal government. Just recently, the Governor's Forum is asking the government to increase the minimum wage. Why do you need to ask the federal government to increase the minimum wage when you are a state government? Why don't you up your own minimum wage? Why tell the federal government to do it? I'm asking this because there's been so much money coming to the various states and local governments. And the people are saying, we are not seeing enough. What can be done so that it will no longer be a state government that is kind of tying itself to a federal government, but a state government that is independent, executing policies for their people, not necessarily waiting for the federal.
I agree with you. I think the one thing I would encourage more Nigerians to do is the same vigor and the same accountability we have for our federal government, we need to have for our state government, and ensure that our governors, our local government chairmen, give them the same transparency, openness that we currently see in our federal government. You know, I think a lot of Nigerians are always saying, hey, when I see my economy changing, it must be the president who's doing good, or when the economy is going bad, it must be our president doing bad. And I think that is a lot of pressure and a lot of burden that is somewhat misplaced. And I think we should hold our federal government and our leaders highly accountable. But I think that we need to pivot and say, hey, if we're going to hold them on a scale of 1 to 10, our governors need to do the same thing. As we all know, governors have the ability of having federal dollar allocations. And we want to say, hey, where are those allocations going? How are you improving our particular state? You know, Nigeria doesn't change from the top. It changes from the bottom moving towards the top. And our governors play a key role in that.
Well, you spoke about national image earlier, and right now people would say, or critics might want to say, that we have a battered image, both home and abroad. And that is all thanks to social media. A lot of youths are not doing that image quite good.
Sure.
And now you're diasporans, you have a lot of good things to say about Nigerians, but Nigerian youths have worse things to say about Nigeria. How would you now encourage the random Nigerian youths to see the good that government does, irrespective of the challenges it faces?
Yeah. You know, Nigeria will face challenges like every country does. And I think what I said earlier is Nigerians, we have to, of course, hold our government accountable and talk about those things on social media. But the government is doing so many great things. It's interesting. I had the opportunity of participating in the convention as a member for the Committee of Environment and Sanitation. And it gave me a great opportunity of seeing what happens on a local level day to day. How is our, in this case, Abuja, looking? How is it feeling? And getting the opportunity of talking to other Nigerians who are here. The one great thing I saw is, like, one, the committee was ran very effectively. The committee gave opportunities for folks to take a step up. And I really want to encourage that. And I think it wouldn't have happened unless we had true leadership within our country saying, hey, we want young folks to get involved. We want people to get involved and tell their story. I want to commend the chairman of that committee and also the secretary of that committee, Senator Onwuche, for their leadership there. And I think the reason why I'm bringing that up is because it was all over social media about all the work that we did. And people were sending me pictures of the day and all the events I went to. And I said, I didn't realize this was even televised, let alone going to be on social media. So I think we need to bring up stories like that, stories that allow folks to say, yes, Nigeria has these challenges, but Nigeria has a lot of great things that are happening. It's just that it's not getting reached out to community. And we know social media, there's no way you can move forward in society without being on social media. And I think that's the one thing, one improvement our government can do. Be on social media more, bring out activists, talk about all the great things that are happening, and gives people opportunity to get involved.
The tendency where Nigerians see everything being the responsibility of the federal and less responsibility of the state or the local government, is it a federal government problem or a state government, in the sense that, is it the federal government that is creating that impression that we are the overall, we are the ultimate? Or is it the state that is refusing to free itself? Because it's serious that we're talking about the state police. And we're also thinking of a state, some advocate the state police that is centrally controlled again.
Sure.
And so where is this burden? Is it the federal government that will need to now free itself? I said, look, we're a federating nation. So you take your responsibility, let me do my own, so that people will think less of the federal government being responsible for everything that happens.
You know, I think, as always, the federal government plays a very unique role. And I think what always happens is that when things are going bad, it's always easier to blame somebody. And what the proverbial response is, let's blame our president. And so I think the federal government continues to take the role they do take, which is, one, supporting states and supporting the overall well-being of Nigeria. But I think what we do see is a lot of governors and state reps and also commissioners abdicating their power, abdicating their responsibility, and not failing to take the seat and saying, hey, as a leader of the state, I'm taking complete ownership of the utility and the functionality of the state. I'm going to increase the economy. I'm going to do policies that are going to help every single resident of my particular state. So I think when a lot of Nigerians feel like their governor or their local government chairman has failed to listen to them, the last resort they have is typically our federal government. And the federal government, because it's a body that represents every single Nigerian, will always be there. So I think if we really press and hold our governors accountable for the work they are doing and what they aren't doing, we're going to see that change. So I do not want to pull the foot off the throttle when it comes to our federal government and work that they're doing. But I do want to say, hey, we need to challenge our government and say, hey, listen, you were elected to do a particular body of work. The expectation is that every citizen in your state is going to expect you to do so. Your failure to do so can risk the ability for you to keep your job within 4 years.
Well, President Tinubu has been heavily criticized for the increased borrowing under his administration, and the presidency has quite argued that we need this borrowing because of to fund critical infrastructure and development. How would you rate the level of borrowings? Do you think it's necessary? Do you think it's an overkill? How do you rate that?
Sure. I think every economy has the responsibility for providing infrastructure, providing basic tools to citizens. And the great thing about life, sometimes you actually have the revenue to cover it, and at times you do not. And I think we always look at borrowing as like, hey, whenever we borrow money, it means that we're failing. It means that our society is going to be crumbling. No, it doesn't always mean that. What we have to do is recognize some projects are capital intensive, where you borrow money to achieve the capital. That new capital that you kind of invest in, the new investment, yields money, you pay back the dollars. So I think there'll be concern if it was an inability for Nigeria to pay back its funds, and that is not a concern. We are a heavily capitalized country. We generate revenue and we can pay back our funds. But I think the one thing we don't have is time. And I really appreciate this administration saying, hey, we're going to tackle these big, massive issues which require dollars. And we want to make sure that no expense goes unturned to achieving those goals.
Okay, as the president knows, as we enter the last phase in this, the next 1 year, and it's also an election year.
Sure.
Now, what are those maybe two basic things, if you place side by side the gains that the government has achieved, the challenges on one side, what are those two things you will expect that the government should implement so that it will help to change the tides?
Sure. I think number one, education. I really appreciate this administration and President Bola Ahmed Tinubu for their goal in saying, hey, we're going to tackle this issue about education. We have too many of our young folks who have the inability to go to school purely because they don't have 5,000 naira. So we want to make sure we address that. So we've done that, and I continue to see that the administration focus on that and continue to focus on that. The second piece is healthcare. We recognize that the day-to-day lives of Nigerians are not going to be changed whether they get 5,000 naira or not. The day-to-day lives of Nigerians are going to be focused on saying, how is the money I'm making being able to cover the cost of my food, my bills, and my ability to protect my family? The second piece is that we're going to make sure that this country continues to recognize that the strength of the naira empowers everyday Nigerians and the government. So we anticipate this country to continue to address the concern of what is the current exchange rate in CBN, what is the current exchange rate in the black market, and how do we continue to help investors, businesses come into our country, invest, bring their businesses here, hire our capable, smart, and achieving Nigerians to meet the needs and their goals.
Well, we're fast approaching the election year, which is 2027.
Sure.
And now we see a lot of political actors springing up, different parties presenting their presidential candidates. And again, the president seeking re-election.
Sure.
Do you think that President Tinubu would overcome the storm and, probably return in 2027? Yeah,
I think myself and folks who live in diaspora very much support our current president and believe that he will win re-election. And for two reasons. What we typically see, especially when you're coming from the outside looking in, you see a lot of folks saying, hey, we're easily able to identify all the issues of Nigeria. And our current president is saying, no, I have solutions to our issues. So I think a lot of voters, when they're listening, they're tired of hearing all the problems in Nigeria. So they really want aspirants to say, hey, we're going to stop talking about the problems and now talk about the solutions. And I think Bola Tinubu has a great record to show for the last 3 years of him saying, hey, I'm not talking about problems. I'm impacting, and by impacting, providing solutions to our everyday issues and also looking for the future. So we want to make sure that we support the current president, but more importantly, recognize that his scorecard is impeccable moving today and also in the future.
All right. We must say thank you so much for your time with us on the program. That's why we'll leave the conversation this morning. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you for being a part of our conversation. We'll now hand you over to Lagos, where the show continues with Ria and the rest of the team.
All right. Thank you so much, Abuja. That was a fantastic conversation. Thank you.